Well, good morning. How are you doing today? You know, it's just another horrible weather day here in California. I talk to my friends in other places of the world, and I don't say a whole lot because we kind of got it good here. As we're moving into summer time, it feels like just around the corner. We begin, my son and I, to plan our annual trip to the High Sierras for fishing. We've done this every year, just the two of us. We go to the same campground that I went to as a kid, and we just really enjoy this time, these few days together to really not do a whole lot except for to fish and to laugh and to talk. We talk a lot, but we also, as guys, we don't need to talk a lot. We kind of sit there and just be fine just hanging out side by side. And this is a great time. Well, we're beginning to plan for this summer, and as we're doing that, my sister heard about the trip, and she said, maybe we'll go with you this year, which I think is great. It's great to have my sister and her kids. And I told my son that, hey, we're going to have more family going. He said, it's supposed to be guys only, Dad. I said, son, it's going to be great. This will be amazing. And Mom will come. He said, I love Mom, but not when we're camping, Dad. And I said, well, son, they can help us a lot. There are things we can do together because as guys, we don't put a whole lot of energy into certain things on camping that my wife does, like cooking. We eat every day, but you can cook fish in a variety of ways. You can fry them, make hush puppies, do fish tacos, but after 4 days, we look every night, go, okay, what are we going to make tonight? You only do potatoes so many ways, and so I thought they can help us. They can help us cook and things too, son. He goes, well, they don't know how to cook fish, Dad. My son's 16; he ought to know better by now, but he's still learning. And I said, well, you know what? Also, there's a lot of things they can do. So Dad, we don't even clean at the campground. So why? I said, son, just keep that to yourself. Let's talk this through. But we're going to look today at a story where Jesus was with his friends, and they're in a place where there's a lot of fishing going on, and it's time for dinner. And there's a huge crowd that are staying for dinner, and Jesus says, hey, how are we going to feed this crowd? They found a way to do that. So we're going to look at this story in the book of John that talks about an amazing dinner that we can learn a lot from. Here's what it says in your outline there in your bulletin. It says, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. So here's Jesus in the Galilee region, which is north of Judea. And in this gospel telling from John, he focuses a lot on Judea and Samaria. He doesn't do a lot in Galilee, but he does tell the stories in Galilee that the other Gospels talked about. When Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about it, he tends to talk about it also. And so here they are just north of Galilee and north of Judea and Galilee. And they tell this story that is also in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All four Gospels have it, so it's a really important story. If it's in all four of the Gospels, if all four of the biographers talk about it, there's something there for us to learn. They want to make sure we didn't miss it. And so John talks about it just like the other guys. And they each kind of focus on different aspects of the story that they saw. For instance, Luke was saying that they were, when they were getting ready for this to happen, that Jesus had said, hey, let's go away by ourselves. And the disciples and he went away from the crowd. Mark talks about them being with Jesus all day, this big crowd, and Jesus was teaching them all day. John doesn't talk about that. He just talks about this aspect right here where he says that a great crowd of people followed him. They've been teaching, as Mark shared. And Luke had said, let's go away, Jesus said to them. And now as they're going away, the crowd of people followed him. And in the English it says they followed him, but really in the Greek it says more than that. We don't kind of get the heart language. When it says they followed him, could have probably been translated that they kept following him. They kept following Jesus because they continually saw. They saw over and over again all the things that Jesus kept on doing. There's this continuous motion. The crowd kept following because they kept seeing all that Jesus kept doing. And as they saw, they said, we've got to go follow him. So even though Jesus was trying to go away, they kept following. The crowds wanted to see him. They wanted to be around him. They wanted to have their sicknesses healed. They wanted to hear from him. They wanted to be touched. They wanted to meet him. And so even in spite of the inconvenience, Jesus let people come. And he spent time with them. And there was this great multitude, this great crowd, and Jesus had compassion on them. They kept following. They kept wanting to be around him. They wouldn't give him any space. But Jesus didn't say, hey, let's get away. He let them come. The crowd saw all that he was doing. They saw that their sicknesses were being healed. And so Jesus, it says, went up on a mountainside. And he sat down with his disciples. The crowd was following, but Jesus sat down and started teaching his disciples. He'd been teaching them all day, Mark says, and now he wants to share a little lesson with his disciples. And it says in John, the Jewish Passover festival was near. So they're in Galilee. The Jewish festival of Passover is coming up. And the crowd is there. There's a big crowd in town because the festival is coming and they may be on their way over there. And this group is in Galilee and they're wanting to meet Jesus. And John is the one who says, hey, it's time of Passover. And the disciples knew what that meant. It meant that it was a kind of a historic time, but it was historic because they remembered back and they knew the stories from their ancestry, from their heritage, that Jesus had told them also along the way that God had saved the people of Israel. And he did it at Passover. He took the people out of Egypt and brought them into the promised land. It started with Passover, a time when the angel of death came through their area and all the people who put the mark of blood over their doorpost, the angel of death passed over and then he took the people out. And so they remembered this. It was something they celebrated. They remembered that God had always been with them. And this huge crowd is following Jesus. And even as God took care of the people of Israel in the wilderness for 40 years, Jesus is about to take care of them in this one 4-hour period of time where they're hungry. Jesus is going to meet their needs, not just physically, but also spiritually. And there's a couple of lessons that we're going to learn from this story that are meant for the people, are meant for the disciples, but they're also meant for us. Here's the first lesson. Jesus has a plan. And he invites you to join him. That's big news. Jesus has a plan. This isn't just a day that's happening by chance and Jesus going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? This crowd is here. What are we going to feed them? I'm not sure how it's going to work out. It's not like me going to the camp box and looking and finding more potatoes, looking in the ice chest and seeing no more trout, and wondering, son, how would you like your potatoes tonight? Jesus has a plan, and he invites us to join him in this plan. Here's what it says. When Jesus looked up, he's teaching the disciples, he looks up and he sees the crowd who keep following because they keep seeing all the things that Jesus keeps on doing. And he looks up and he saw the crowd coming toward him. And so he turns to his buddy Philip. The 12 disciples are there. He looks at Philip and he says, hey Philip, where are we going to buy bread for these people so they can eat? He turns to Philip and says, where are we going to get the bread to feed them? He asks this only to test Philip. For Jesus already had in mind what he was going to do. Kind of a tricky question. Philip, what are we going to do? Knowing himself what he's already going to do, but wanting to see how Philip responds. And you might think, well, why does he pick on Philip? There's 11 other guys. Why Philip? Well, Philip was actually from that nearby town of Bethsaida. And so I think he turned to Philip and said, hey, Philip, you're kind of from around here. What are we going to do? There's a huge crowd. How do you think we can get bread for all of them? And Philip begins to think. Philip is he's a planner. He's someone who can get things done. And this little phrase here, he asked him only to test him. The 4 Gospels told the story. Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't mention this. Only John says this. John says he asked Philip only to test him because he already had in mind what he was going to do. And so Philip is there wondering, gosh, what are we going to do? And he begins to problem solve because that's what Philip does. And Philip thinks, well, I'm not sure. But Jesus had a plan. Jesus had a way of getting the job done. See, Philip should have known that Jesus could get things done in a way that wouldn't make sense. He'd been around Jesus long enough to see Jesus do miracles, to heal people. But he didn't have that yet in his mindset. He had a way of thinking, a way of his culture, and he wanted to get it done, but he didn't know what to do. He didn't realize that Jesus had a plan. And Jesus was inviting Philip to get involved. But the second lesson is this. not only does Jesus have a plan and invite you, but the way that he invites you, what he wants to invite you to do is he invites you to sacrifice and receive his blessing. Jesus had a plan all along, and his plan was to invite Philip to get involved, and the invitation to get involved was actually to sacrifice. And so Philip answered Jesus, well, you know, Jesus, it would take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Then another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke, and he said, hey, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? So Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted, and then he did the same with the fish. So Philip's in a dilemma. Jesus invited him in and said, hey, Philip, how do you think we're going to get enough bread to feed all these people? And Philip has thought long and hard about it, and he has no answer. He says, first of all, Jesus, let me let you know this. I've been thinking about this because I kind of do numbers. I'm kind of a numbers guy. If we're going to feed these people, it would take a half year of wages to be able to feed them. And then they might only get a bite. And Jesus, even if we had enough money to buy it, I don't know where we can buy this much bread. Today, now. I don't know where this is going to come from. So I've got a dilemma. I don't have enough resources. And even if I had the resources, the town doesn't have enough bread to do it. So what do you think we can do? Philip was good at solving problems. He had a great answer. He knew exactly how much it cost. He had figured it out, computed it like I do, and figured out that, you know what, we just can't do this. It's not possible. And Jesus had a plan. He wanted to help Philip realize that it wasn't possible. That was Jesus' plan. I want you to realize that it's not possible. You don't have the resources, and the town can't even do it, but I've got a plan. Your knowledge won't solve this problem. But man, so often, I outthink God. I let God know, God, you've got to understand, God. He's like, really, Scott? I've got to understand. Well, you just don't realize what that person is like. You don't realize how big this problem is. I don't think that this is ever going to get better. And Jesus has a different way of thinking. He has a different economy than Philip. Philip was thinking dollars and cents. And that's not bad to think dollars and cents. But Jesus was thinking differently. He had a different plan. He had a different whole method to his madness. And the calculations didn't matter in Jesus' mind. They mattered to Philip, and it wasn't wrong, but that wasn't the answer. So Philip is a numbers guy, a planning guy, a strategic guy, and even his strategic leadership couldn't solve the problem. Then there was another guy, and this guy was Andrew. Andrew was Simon Peter's brother. Andrew was the guy who, when Jesus was out on the lake and saw the fishermen, he called them in and said, come follow me and I'll make you fisher of men. But that wasn't the first time Jesus met these guys. They'd actually met him earlier. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was a follower of John the Baptist. And he met John the Baptist, and John the Baptist talked about Jesus, the Messiah, the one who must increase and I must decrease. He was foretelling the one as a voice in the wilderness crying out. And when Andrew heard about that, it says that Andrew left John and ran home and found his brother Simon Peter. And said, Simon, you've got to come see this. We found the Messiah. You've got to come meet him. So where Philip was a numbers guy, Andrew was a people person. And so Simon's brother is looking for ways to solve the problem, not like Philip is. Philip's looking for the numbers and the way to make it make sense. And Andrew's going, there's got to be someone around I can get who can help with this. There's got to be somebody. He goes around the crowd and he brings back a little boy. And he pulls this boy aside, and Andrew said this, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? And once again, in the English, we get this, but it actually means even more in the heart language. He says we have this boy, but it's actually a double diminutive. It means we have this little boy. Not just a boy, we've got a little boy. So it's not a boy like my son, who when we cook together now, we can actually cook together. It's my little boy who says, let's make dinner together, Dad. And he goes and gets the potatoes and puts them down, and that's his help. It's a little boy who's going to help, but he's just a little boy. And the little boy has his own lunch. And it says he has 5 small barley loaves. And we look at that and go, well, that's great. He's got 5 loaves of bread. That's kind of cool. But the readers go, wait, you brought me a little boy with 5 small barley loaves? See, barley was not like, oh my gosh, we're going to have barley today. Barley was a kind of bread you'd feed the animals. It had about 1/3 of the value of wheat. It wasn't like an exciting, man, we got barley tonight. You go, oh man, we got barley now, let's go feed it to the horses. It was barley, not something to get excited about. In fact, in the Talmud, the ways the Jewish kind of lived their life together, in the Talmud it read, a passage says, there is a fine crop of barley. And another man replied, tell it to the horses and the donkeys. We've got barley. Great, go tell the horse and donkey they got food tonight, because that's not for me. So they got this little boy with 5 small barley loaves. They've also got 2 small fish. And in the English, it doesn't quite translate like this. We think of 2 small fish, well, maybe it's just a pan-sized trout. No, these are 2 small fish. And the word for fish that's used in the Greek is ichthus. But in this word, they use the word asperia. Asperia is more like a small salted fish. It's kind of, like we don't have trout, we've got a couple anchovies. So good news. We got sardines, anchovies, whatever you want to call it. We got this small little appetizer for a little boy. It's a good lunch for a little boy who wants to have barley loaves and salted fish. But I'm sure Phil's saying, you haven't even thought through this is not the answering. It's not the answer. This is like a little boy's lunch. But Jesus has a plan, and he invites us to join him. And the invitation is to sacrifice. And the little boy sacrifices. He says, here's my lunch. I thought ahead. I've got a lunch. Here's my lunch. I'll give it up. And so Andrew comes with a little boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 salty fish, and he kind of knows, hey, I don't know how this is going to go very far. But the good news is, God doesn't need a whole lot. See, Jesus didn't need much. What he wanted was to invite them in. And the boy understood that, and he sacrificed. The invitation was a sacrifice. He said, oh, here it is. I want to give this to you. And that was an incredible sacrifice. To give up all that he had. Even though it wasn't much, he gave up all that he had. And Jesus looked, and I'm sure he's thinking, gosh, you guys don't get it yet. It's going to be amazing. You guys don't even see what's around the corner. But I'm inviting you to sacrifice because I want to give a blessing. And sometimes, actually oftentimes, God deliberately restrains his plan and waits for us to get involved. He deliberately waits until we participate. Not that he needs us. God's not going, oh my gosh, how am I going to handle this? Jesus isn't going, well, I don't know what I'll do if they don't bring me something. I'm not sure what I'll do. He had a plan. And he wanted them to sacrifice. And the little boy sacrificed. So Jesus said, have the people sit down. Jesus wasn't in a panic. Jesus wasn't in a hurry. He's about to do this amazing catering job, but he's not stressed. Philip is stressed because we don't have enough money. And even if we had enough money, we couldn't get it today. And Andrew's stressed, looking for someone to connect with. And he finds a little boy, but all the little boy has is barley loaves and fish. Here you go, Jesus. It's not much. I don't know what you're going to do with this. They're stressed, but Jesus, he's not stressed at all. He says, hey, have the people sit down. And there's this big pasture there. And the people sat down. And as I was reading this week, I thought of, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. The psalmist writes, you prepare a table for me. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So Jesus says, hey, have the people sit down. And the people sat down, and there were 5,000 men. 5,000 men. That's not counting all the other little boys like this boy. It's not counting the wives and the women and the other children. But there are 5,000 men, maybe 15,000, 20,000 people were gathered who kept following Jesus because they kept seeing all that he kept doing. Has them sit down, and now Philip realizes we don't have enough money, we don't have the resources. Andrew goes, here's a little kid, but all he's got is this little tiny sack lunch. Jesus says, have him sit down. And Jesus is about to teach him a lesson. That people who are late often hurry. But Jesus is never late. And he's never in a hurry. He's seldom early, but he's never late. And he's not in a rush. Our God has peace. Even when we're stressed. Rightfully so stressed, because what we look at from our view doesn't make sense. But he says, have the people sit down. And then he took the loaves and he gives thanks. Here's Jesus holding this small lunch, 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, and he takes the bread and he gives thanks. He pauses and he turns to his Father and thanks him for what he has. A little side note that I've been wrestling with this week. If tomorrow all that you would have is what you're thankful for today, if tomorrow all you had is what you're thankful for today, would that be enough for you? Jesus had this attitude of gratitude. He gives thanks. He stops and he turns and he thanks his Father for all that he has. Thankful for this boy who was going to sacrifice. Thankful for the blessing that's about to happen. Thankful for the crowd that is looking for their needs to be met. Thankful for his disciples who are going to learn a lesson. Thankful for allowing him to be here, even though he's just a corner around from giving his life. He stops and he holds the bread up and he gives thanks. And then it says he distributed to those who were seated. And it says they had as much as they wanted. And then he did the same with the fish. See, the miracle is that it was in Jesus' hands. The miracle wasn't in the serving. Although you might say, well, that's kind of a miraculous act. The disciples, think about this. I would not want to be a disciple in that story. A crowd has been with Jesus, Mark said, for the whole day listening, and now they're hungry. They're possibly travelers. They don't have a place to go back and get food. So Jesus says, how are we going to feed them? They're hungry. And Jesus says, okay, here we got this sack lunch. I'm going to give thanks. And now, guys, you join here. I'm going to have you pass this out. They've got their backs to the crowd, and they're kind of whispering to each other, how's this going to work? What's going to happen? You guys got another plan? How can we get out of here without them catching us? And Jesus takes this sack lunch and divides it up among the 12 of them. And then they turn around. That's kind of the miracle in my mind, that they turned around and went and started passing this out. Like it was somehow going to go beyond the first row. See, a moment ago, that lunch belonged to the little boy. And he sacrificed. But the miracle wasn't even in his sacrifice. The miracle wasn't in the serving. The miracle was that it was in Jesus' hands. And he can do much with our little. And he wanted to teach them that. He could have done it any other way. He didn't have to have that lunch. But he wanted to show them that this boy's sacrifice actually allowed this miracle to take place. And he wanted the disciples to see, it's not in your serving. You don't understand. I know you didn't understand this was going to happen. You had no idea. Even now, you don't know how this is going to work. But you went out and served. And so you were a part of the miracle. But it wasn't you that did the miracle. It wasn't the boy who did the miracle. It was God who does the miracle. But we get to be involved because Jesus has a plan. And he invites us to be involved. And the invitation is to sacrifice and get this blessing. So I guess the question I'm thinking about is what's his plan for me? And I'm like a kid who's got 5 barley loaves and a couple of fish. God, you don't understand how messed up my family is. You don't understand how totally disturbed our neighbors are. Yeah, they need you because they're messed up. But I've gone to this table and I don't have all the answers. I don't know how to share my story. All I've got is this little thing. And he goes, yeah, that's what I need. I need a little boy with a sack lunch that has 5 barley loaves and a couple of salted fish, and that's what I'll use to perform the miracle. But I invite you to sacrifice. And here's what I don't think I saw this before. Remember in Jesus' early ministry? After he was baptized, he went out in the wilderness. And after 40 days, he was hungry. Imagine that. And the devil comes and tempts him. And the devil says, you're hungry. Why don't you turn these rocks, these stones, into bread? And what does Jesus say? Man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Jesus did for the crowd what he wouldn't even do for himself. What an amazing God. He looks at the crowd and says, I will do a miraculous thing, and I will turn this barley loaves into a meal for everybody. And everyone had enough. A thing that I also saw is that the people who ate as much as they wanted included the little boy who gave him his lunch. He gave him his lunch, and that day he ate and had more than he needed. So Jesus invites me to sacrifice. And sometimes sacrifice is not something I'd like to do. I don't sign up for that. I want the easy road. But as I sacrifice, I receive a blessing. The little boy sacrificed, but he received back even more than he had in his original lunch. It's kind of this new math that Jesus puts up there. That 5 loaves and 2 fish were multiplied as they were divided and subtracted. They were multiplied as they were divided and subtracted. We give away and we actually receive a multiplication of his blessing. Not only did he eat, but everyone ate. He sacrificed his lunch, which could have fed him and been a good lunch. But by giving it up, he gives the crowd of 5,000 and more an all-you-can-eat buffet. And he himself has all he can eat. That's blessing. God wants to bless me. He has a plan. His plan is to bless me. His plan is to teach disciples. His plan is not just to feed the crowd. His plan is to teach the disciples. His plan is not just to let the boy be a part of it, but to let him watch how God does great amazing things when we sacrifice. Jesus has a plan. He invites us to join him. His invitation is for us to sacrifice and to receive his blessing. Because ultimately, point 3, Jesus wants to bless the world through you. That's his plan. His plan is for you to sacrifice and get a blessing, but the plan is not just to have you feel happy. It's that he'll bless the world through you. He wants to love you, he wants to use you, and his plan, his mode, his method, like Philip had a method and Andrew had a method, is to actually bless the world through us. He doesn't need us, but he invites us. And the way we get involved is by sacrificing. In sacrifice, we get a blessing to get his ultimate goal, which is to bless the crowd, to bless the disciples. For them to come back and go, I don't understand this. This doesn't make sense. He calms the sea and he multiplies food. How does that work? And to bless the boy who on this crazy day gives him his lunch and watches Jesus do something just fabulous. Verse 12 says, when they all had enough to eat, Jesus said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left. Let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves, left over by those who had eaten. Incredible. I'm sure they're walking through this saying, oh man, it's Passover time. Guys, remember the story that when our ancestors, when the people of Israel, they were in the wilderness 40 years, remember that God fed them every day with this manna. It was on the ground, and they picked it up, and they would gather, and it would just be there every day for them. And they'd gather their food for the day. When they gathered more than they had, it would get rotten, so they had to learn to trust that God was going to meet their needs every day. That was kind of a crazy thing. I hope he does something like that now, because I don't know what's going to happen here. And then they see him do this miracle, and think, wow, that's just like he met the needs. He's meeting the needs here. And now he has them gather and pick up the leftovers. And this little lunch becomes 12 baskets full of leftovers. And I wondered, why 12 baskets? Why does John say 12? Well, if there are 12 disciples, each of them has a basket. And they now have a tangible, visible reminder that, oh my gosh, I saw the lunch that was smaller than this. Because the basket word used there is not just a basket, it's like a big basket for carrying big fish and big objects. Now they've each got this basket, and from a little lunch, they now have 12 baskets of leftovers. After feeding 5,000 and more, they've collected. But Jesus is generous. So generous that they're left over. So generous that everybody eats all they want and there's more left over. So generous that he's not wasteful. And he says, guys, go pick up the leftovers. We're going to use that for something else. I don't know what it's for. I don't know if there was a soup kitchen around the corner. It was a meal for tomorrow. I'm not sure. But he wants them to see this is valuable. And we're going to use this for something else. So they've got this basket going, oh my gosh, what a crazy day. 12 baskets, 12 guys. 12 baskets, I don't know, but 12 tribes. God's always consistently generous. Because Jesus has a plan. And his plan is to invite you to join him. His plan is to invite you to sacrifice. Sacrifice so you can receive a blessing. Like the boy was blessed, like the disciples were blessed, like the crowd was blessed. Blessed by watching God do something that they've never seen before. And blessed by getting fed themselves. The boy sacrificed, but he still ate. He still ate good. And his plan is to bless the world through us. Let me close with this little phrase here I was thinking about. See, this story isn't about the meal to fill the crowd's hunger. It's not about the meal. It wasn't even about the boy who sacrificed his meal. It was a great thing, but it wasn't about the boy who sacrificed his meal. It wasn't about the disciples who served the crowd. What it was really about was about Jesus who came to save. And as both Kathys have shared, we're in this unique season of our faith that around the corner is Palm Sunday. Around the corner is Easter Sunday. Around the corner is a reminder of how much he loves us. Looking back, we're here on a day a year ago that our friend Kathy went to be with Jesus. And she and Dick were willing to offer up their basket. I'm so glad they did. I can't imagine my life without this part of my life. I'm so glad they were willing to sacrifice. And I'm sure there were times, if they're like me, they thought, well, what good's it going to do? It's been 5 years, about 14 people. You know, what's really? I mean, they're great people. These 14 we love, but isn't it supposed to be bigger than this? But God has a plan. His plan is to invite us in. His plan is that we'd sacrifice, that we'd be blessed, and that not just us blessed, but the world will be blessed through us. And so, after the people saw the sign Jesus performed, here's what they began to say. Hey, we know we're going to get free lunch. I'm sure they were thinking that. Some of them, I would. I'm going to show up here again. It's great lunch. Man, I'm going to bring my friends next time so they can be healed. Possibly. But what John says they said was this. Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. Andrew said, Simon, you got to come see him. We found the Messiah. And the crowd's now saying, man, this is the prophet. And even so, they didn't understand what this truly meant. He didn't just come into the world. He came to save the world. And so he's inviting us. He's inviting you. He's inviting me to sacrifice. What's your sacrifice? Sacrifice involves my time. Man, my time is valuable. Your time is valuable. I value my time based on who I'm giving it to. And there are honestly people who we look at and say, well, I should be nice. But my time is so much more important. We don't say that because that would be very godly, but we think it. And we live it out. What do we value? It's in my calendar. It's how I spend my time. And the people who I spend it on, in my mind, are often not worth it. But Jesus says, no, let them keep coming. They keep coming because they keep seeing all that I keep doing. How are you going to feed them? We don't know, Jesus. There's not enough money. There's not enough food. What are we going to do? I've got this little kid. All he's got is this. And Jesus says, perfect. What will you sacrifice with your time? How about sacrificing your energy? It might involve a sacrifice of your finances. This is a very generous people that you're around. Here's the dangerous thing. You become like the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you're in this group, you're going to become generous because you're around generous people. They give their time and their money and their energy, and they do things like receive an offering in the back in a little box, and they put the offering in there that goes not to just Rancho Chapel, but goes around the world. It goes with me to Africa next month. And there are guys in Tanzania, men and women, who wouldn't have what they've had the last 2 years had you not been going with me. And so our blessing goes on along. It's like giving that little boy giving his lunch up, saying, man, this is an expensive lunch. You understand, my mom made this. This is important, but I'll give it up. So welcome to Rancho Chapel. You'll become people who start giving up your lunch. But the good news is this. You'll be fed. You'll go, man, I'm so glad I gave that away because I would have never seen this amazing thing. Last year, your ministry with DCPI, with my friend Steve and myself and all this, there were 48,789 leaders trained last year around the world in places like Syria. My friend Robert went and trained in Syria. He said he was within kilometers of ISIS. And everyone at the training could tell a story of one of their family members who'd been killed by ISIS. Your training went and helped us prepare a leader named Pastor In. I'll only give his name Pastor In because he lives in Pakistan. He had a vision when we met him. He said, I planted 40 churches. I thought, my gosh, I planted one church. It took me 10 years to plant one church and a daughter church. You planted 40. You're my hero. But he had a vision. I want to plant 2,000. I want to start 2,000 churches. And when I sent my friend Sam to go train him, we trained him in Malaysia because it would be safer for Pastor Ed to come there rather than being trained in Pakistan, put his life in danger. So he came to Malaysia in a hotel room. They trained him for a few days. And he went back. He told Sam, God wants you to plant 2,000 churches. And we just kind of smiled and said, okay, God bless you. It's been a year and a half. Pastor N has helped start 1,900 churches. 1,900 churches that you're a part of. You're like the little boy who gave your lunch. And that lunch helped get Sam over to Malaysia to train. And it's happening. You got to know you're a part of it. See, no one in the crowd even knew this was happening. I think they just thought, oh, cool, great lunch. They didn't realize that behind the scenes, he was thanking God, and then he was taking this little lunch and multiplying it. Even the disciples, they didn't know it was going to happen. I'm sure they're whispering. It's not written by the gospel. I'm sure they were saying, dude, what's going to happen? And the crowd was just kind of enjoying it. But they saw what was going on. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you for being a part of all that God's doing with DCPI, with folks all over in different parts of the world, with the different leaders that you support. It makes a world of difference. Your lunch is huge. You may feel like all I've got is like some barley loaves and a couple of fish. But man, in God's hands, it does incredible things. So how might God want you to sacrifice tomorrow? What's it look like in your neighborhood? Maybe ask God. And don't be surprised it'll give you in your heart this really crazy, big, audacious thing. You'll go, okay, that can't be from God. If it's harder than you think it should be, it might be from God. Because if you're like me, you tend to think of the easy road. I tend to think of the easy road. And sometimes those big crazy things that I think, wow, that must have just been bad pizza last night. That might be from God. I've got to check it and ask some friends. Does it sound like that's the kind of thing God would ask me to do? And your friends will probably say, you know what? It sounds exactly, because it's impossible. You can't do that. But we'll start praying. And you start sharing your faith with your neighbors and your co-workers and your family. And you'll start loving people. And Jesus says, that's perfect. Barley loaves and fish. I can work with that. It's good news. Let me pray for us. God, I thank you for today. I thank you for the invitation you give us to join you in what you're doing. And I thank you that you led us. Jesus, you didn't need that boy's lunch. You didn't need your disciples to serve the people, but you let them be involved. And I thank you for that picture it gives us for the way you work today. The way you've been faithful with the nation of Israel, the way you've been faithful with your disciples, the way you've been faithful throughout the years with those who've given their lives for you, the way you're faithful with us, the way you've been faithful through the people that we love, like Kathy and Dick. God, just a reminder of all that you do, and we want to jump in. We're scared. We know it'll be costly. We know it'll be messy. but we want to jump in. We look forward to seeing you do miracles and letting us be a part of it. So thank you for the miracle of this chapel, this gathering of believers, that we get to go, even though we may not physically go to some places, we get to be a part of it. So thanks so much for all that you're doing. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You know, we joke that Mark Williams gets the potlucks. But I oftentimes get communion. And it's such a great time for us. I'm glad that we do it at Rancho Chapel on a regular basis to remind us of the picture. It's like seeing the story, remembering what we're all about. And it keeps us going. It keeps us moving forward, looking to the future. When one day Jesus said, I'll take this with all of you. It's going to be a big, big table with all kinds of people who don't speak English. In fact, in Revelation it says there'll be people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. It's going to be a messy, fun place with all kinds of great food and different cultures and a new culture of heaven where my sin nature is no longer a part of it. And that's going to be great. When you see me without sin, you'll really like me. You know? That's what I look forward to. And when you see my neighbors who right now don't even know the name of Jesus, they know him as a punchline. They know him as a curse word. But when Jesus takes my barley loaves and my step out and begins to do something, I want them to be there also. So we receive community today as a reminder of where we've been, of when we were a mess, when we didn't even know who he was and didn't want to know him. And we're thankful for this moment we sit here today that we get to get excited about Easter coming. And we anticipate what's going to happen. We get excited about the sing-along. You guys talk for hours and hours here because we just love each other. Thanks for what we have today, God. But we look forward to what's coming. So in a moment, we're going to invite you as our leaders from the back will kind of lead you to the front and let you row by row come up if you're ready to receive communion today. And it's an important thing. I ask you not to do it lightly, not to just do it if you're not ready, not to do it if you're not sure that you believe it. Jesus, through Paul, said people ought to examine their lives. And they ought to think through what this stands for. And if you're in a place going, you know what, I like this, but I'm still checking it out, I'm just kind of dipping my toe in the water, no worries. You don't have to walk up. Just feel free to sit there and I'm just going to kind of watch, observe. But in a moment, they're going to come and they're going to take a piece of bread and a cup of juice. And what that symbolizes is an amazing thing. Jesus said, this is my body, which is for you. And this is my blood, which I gave for you. It covers your sin. It is like the Passover that makes you clean, makes you white as snow, though my sins were as scarlet. If you want to check it out, just check it out. But if you're ready, you're saying, you know what, man, I need that. Then come. Come and take the elements. And I'd ask you to take them back to your chair and just sit there for a moment. And as you hold them, would you do that back today and future look and thank God for where he's brought you from? And would you thank him for where you are today? Would you begin to pray for your friends who you know don't know him? That you can't imagine. I can't imagine heaven without them. The family members we love, that we enjoy getting together, even though they drive us crazy, we can't imagine heaven without them. But they've got to come to know him. They can't ride on my faith. They've got to ride on their own faith, on their faith in Christ. And it's available for them. So we get to pray for them. And maybe ask the daring question, God, do you want me to sacrifice somehow to be a part of that story? Don't be surprised if he gives you a head nod. Don't be surprised if names and faces come to your mind. Begin praying for them. And after everyone's been served, I'll come back and we'll actually take the elements together. We'll do it as a community. And if you're watching today, man, welcome. Know this, God will not force you. But he's in search mode. He's like my dog that is sniffing you out because he loves you and he wants to find you because you matter to him. And he can't imagine heaven without you. So when you're ready and the leaders come by, just come on up and the music will play. And take the elements back to your chair, sit with them, and pray that backwards today in future prayer. And then we'll all take it together when I come back.
The wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count Love demands my soul, my life, my all.
Jesus was so good at not missing opportunities. There are times where I think later, oh, I should have said this at that moment. In the upper room with his friends. Once again, like that day, them not realizing what's just around the corner, but Jesus fully aware. There in Jerusalem, in a room that was ready, that he'd had them prepare. They did a meal that was annual for them, but it had a new meaning this night. In the meal, he took bread and he broke it. With the crowd, he gave thanks and he broke it. He gave the bread and he said, "This is my body, which is for you. Take and eat." And that night, in the midst of the meal, and the heritage and the thinking back and the remembering of all that the people of God had been through, he took a cup. So this is my blood, which is for you. It's an atonement. It's a new relationship you have with me. Forgiveness of sins. The blood of Christ. Lord, we thank you for this reminder. We've held in our hands something tangible, like your disciples got to hold the basket overflowing. We've got to hold elements that are normal for us, eat and drink. But God, I pray they would be transformed for us, that this would carry us through the week in a new way of remembering your love for the world, your love for people in the midst of a time where it would have made sense for stress and anxiety. There was total peace. And there was an offer of new life for us and for our friends. So God, we pray for our friends that we've been praying for in this moment. Those who don't know you yet, but you know them well. You know their name, you know their past, you know their needs. God, may we be willing to sacrifice, knowing that you invite us into your plan. May we sacrifice so we can receive the blessing of letting you bless them through us. Thanks for letting us be a part of all this It's too much for us. And we thank you. Help us to sacrifice more naturally. To give up what we have. Give up what you've given us, that we might receive even more. In Jesus' name, amen. Every time, Kathy, every stinking time. Just a perfect exclamation point. Just amazing how God works things out. Hey, here's the good news. The disciples doubted. And so will you. See, the gospel, that story was told in all 4 gospels. Matthew tells the story. And he says that, they have these loaves and fish, and they feed 5,000, and there's 12 baskets left over. The next chapter, very next chapter, another crowd is there. And the guys are going, how do we feed them? Next chapter. 7 loaves, 1 fish. They feed the crowd, 7 baskets left over. So here's the deal. If you forget this week, if the sacrifice seems too big, man, I can't do it. It's okay. God will work with you. He's in process. But He wants to help you receive the blessing. And the blessing, I hear that hand, is through the sacrifice. And so, keep moving ahead. Let's keep being God's people. Faithful and at times unfaithful. But thankfully, He loves us. He came to seek and save the lost.
Amen.
And our friends who don't know Him yet need to discover that also. May we be the kind of group that loves each other and loves the world and lets God love them through us. Have an amazing week. Celebrate Easter.
Yeah.